going on, YouTube, and welcome back to Goal Line Hockey. It's your boy Kevin Forte, and today we are taking a look at the Washington Capitals, as this has been a pretty tough start for the Caps to start this season. You know, some of the things that we worried about in the offseason for the Caps have kind of materialized so far this season. A couple of tough injuries, especially with an older team, the second oldest team in the National Hockey League. That's always a concern, especially, the concern. Another thing, a lot of people don't really talk about this much, but especially with those older teams, they tend to struggle out of the gate because there's not a lot of guys that are really fighting for roster spots. And I don't mean that in the sense of, like, of course they're fighting for their role on the team, but there's a little bit of a lack of urgency when you have that kind of group. When you have a team like, say, maybe Ottawa or Buffalo, where you have a lot of young guys that are just trying to stay in the NHL, there's a little bit more urgency and a little bit more hunger. And I think that's something that, to be quite frank with you, is lacking a little bit for the Washington Capitals. Now, it's obviously discrediting guys like Matthew Phillips and Alexei Protas, who are trying to get into the league and really try to make a name for themselves. But so far, they haven't really done that, and they haven't done that all too well, especially after last game. But we'll talk about that today. So the Washington Capitals, a rough start to the season. Things have not gone well for the Caps so far. But there is a little bit of upside for this Washington Capitals team. And the reason for that is they're starting to maybe find a little bit of momentum. So you look at their record so far this season. So they obviously dropped the first game at home, a 4-0 loss to the Pittsburgh Penguins. That was a rough loss for them. But since then, they've come back and played a little bit better, a little bit more spirit. A 3-2 shootout victory over the Calgary Flames. Definitely a less inspiring 3-game losing streak. They lose 6-1 to the Senators, 3-2 in overtime to Montreal, and then 4-1 to the Toronto Maple Leafs. And then they finally get a big win on the road in Jersey to cap off the month of October. And then the next week, they are going to be home until they head back to the New York area to play the Devils again and then face the Islanders. So their schedule, really up until American Thanksgiving, they have one more road trip, which is just up, which I've taken that road many a times, between New Jersey and Washington. You're just basically taking, I think it's 81? Just straight down. And that's pretty much it. So the Devils, Islanders, both playing fairly well, but for the Capitals, those are 4-point games in their division that, if they're able to build up a little momentum here at home, could really help them out once they get to that road trip, and really till they get to that West Coast road trip in late November, where they play a bunch of teams out in California, in Vegas, and Arizona, and that whole little section there. But that's besides the point. A big win the other night for the Caps, excuse me. They really needed that one. That's a game that the Capitals needed to win badly. And like I said, you look at their record right there. It's really not been too impressive. 2-3-1 to start the season. It just hasn't been great for the Caps. You could tell the fans are just not as into it. Their attendance has been a little bit lower. There's less excitement for the Capitals this season. So they really needed to win that game. And the real question is this truly a pivot point game for the Capitals? We see shout out to 27-year-old goaltender Hunter Shepard playing in his first NHL game. Huge shout out there to Hunter Shepard. I remember watching him last year with the Hershey Bears on their quest for a Calder Cup. I did go to Game 6 where they won that final game in Hershey before ultimately winning the Calder Cup down in Coachella Valley. So I'm happy to see Hunter Shepard getting his shot in the NHL, playing well. And some of that is because of the injury front, which we're going to get to in a minute, to Charlie Lindgren, who is the most recent addition in the early injury bug list for the Washington Capitals. It's been quite contagious so far early on this season. Taking a look at some of the injuries for the Washington Capitals so far. We talked about this the other day in my power rankings, but Nick Dowd, who has an upper body injury, he is out for Wednesday's game against the Devils. That's the latest we've heard on that front. Joel Edmondson, that is quite concerning because we knew that this is a guy coming in that has had a lot of injuries in his time in Montreal. So that's obviously not great to see. And then obviously the most recent addition of that was the other night against the Devils at the Rock. Rasmus Sandin left the game with an undisclosed injury. We don't really have any updates on that at this point, but we do expect to get some clarification soon. Charlie Lindgren also on there as well on the injured reserve. But Max Pacioretty we've known about since the beginning of the season, so that's really no surprise there. But everybody else, it's been a rough month of September and October so far for the Capitals in terms of injuries. And that's part of the reason I think they are struggling as much as they are, is they just don't have a ton of healthy bodies. And that kind of forces guys to come into the lineup. And, that seems like a great opportunity for guys like for Matthew Phillips and Alexei Protas and Connor McMichael, which nice to see him get on the board the other night. The Washington Capitals need those guys to produce a little bit because, all things considered, it's been a slow start so far for guys like Alexander Ovechkin, which we're really not used to saying that here, but Alexander Ovechkin has not been his super dominant self to start the season. And the same goes for guys like Kuzi and Oshie and Wilson and all those guys. They just haven't really produced at the level that the Capitals need them to if they really want to go on a run this season. They need to be a little bit better than they've been. And the problem is, too, you haven't seen much from the depth of this team either, which really concerned you, because now you're not getting production from your higher-end guys, and you're also not getting production from your lower-end guys, plus all the injuries on top of that. And that's really where things kind of come at a crossroads for the Capitals, because if the Capitals, if they're not getting, it's just the perfect recipe for disaster for the Capitals. And, it's one of those things that their special teams is not very good either. So it's just a combination of everything kind of stacking up on top of each other has really made it a really difficult first really month and a half here for the Washington Capitals. So just to take a look at that. So look at that top box, and thank you to Hockey Reference. Shout out to them for giving us this information. Their power play is not good. 10% on the power play for the Caps so far this season. That is really, really bad. That has to get better. Penalty kill, a little bit more in the middle of the pack, but it's still not great. Well below average at only 69%. These are things that can get improved upon with guys producing, though, right? If we see more goals from Ovechkin and Kuznetsov, that power play probably looks better, right? That penalty kill probably looks better if Nick Dowd's in the lineup, right? So those are the kind of things where maybe if this team is a little healthier and the combination of more production, we start to see those numbers turn around very quickly. And again, small sample size, very early in the season, so you don't want to read too much into those numbers. But that's part of the backstory for the Capitals' struggles through their first 6 games. Now, so far this season, Alexander Ovechkin, looking at his numbers, he does lead the team in points, which is great to see. But it's really not at the all-impressive level that we're used to with Big Ovi. He's got 5 points in 6 games. John Carlson, with the amount of minutes that John Carlson is playing, look at his average ice time compared to everybody else on this roster. That is insane. Over 25 minutes of ice time through the first 6 games. Mind you, for a guy that was injured last season. So obviously it doesn't seem like Spencer Carberry is holding him back at all at this point. But what's really interesting here is you start to see, and this is really an important thing to look at, is Dylan Strome had a huge game the other night against the Devils, scoring a pair of goals. So now he currently leads the team in goals. He's got 4 goals on the season, and that is huge. Because as much as you'd like to see more from Kuzi and Wilson and guys like Backstrom and Oshie, it's really promising to see a guy like Anthony Mantha get on the board, who he got his first of the season the other night. It's big to see Matthew Phillips putting in a little bit of production. Yeah, it's not great, but still 3 points in 6 games, not bad. Connor McMichael getting on the board the other night as well. Sonny Milano got on the board for the first time as well. You need to see more from those guys because this Capitals team, when the top guys aren't playing well, you need that depth to come up big. And this is a team that heavily relies on that top-end talent in Ovechkin and Kuznetsov and Backstrom and Carlson on the back end. to see more production from guys like Milano and Strome and Phillips. Those are the guys that are really going to make this team stable as the season moves forward. The nights where Ovechkin and Wilson and those guys get shut down in the top six, they're going to need guys for scoring depth to produce. And that's why they gave good money to Strome, to Milano, because those are guys that are going to have to produce in the middle six of this lineup. It's not always going to be the Ovechkin show. They need other guys to step up. And that's a good sign for the Capitals. And that's something we really haven't seen through the first couple games of the season. And when you look at a really, really concerning stat for the Washington Capitals so far this season, is their goals for. Their goals for is basically a rebuilding team's numbers. It is atrocious. This is a team that needs to play better in terms of the offensive side of the game. And that's not something we're used to saying for the Washington Capitals, but that is the reality right now. You look at their goals for right now. 31st in the National Hockey League. So only one team in the NHL has less goals than the Capitals. They have 13 goals through their first 6 games of the season. That's not good enough. You need to see more goals from the Capitals. And again, a lot of that comes from Kuznetsov and Ovechkin and Backstrom. But the point still stands. They're not scoring enough. And their defense is actually playing okay. It's right around the middle of the pack at 19th in the league, which isn't good, but it's not terrible. And that's something that definitely gives me concern for the Caps, is their lack of scoring is going to be a problem. But like I said, was this game against a very good Devils team, mind you, a turning point in the season for the Capitals? I think it can be. I think scoring 6 goals when, you put the numbers together, through the first 6 games of the season, they've scored 13 goals. They've scored half of those goals in this game against the Devils. They scored 6 on the New Jersey Devils. So when you put the other 5 games before that behind, they scored 7 goals in their first 5 games. So despite scoring 6 goals in a game, they are still second last in the NHL for goals for. That just shows you how far back the Capitals have been in their scoring production. And things got to turn around quickly. Because like I said, I showed you guys the schedule. They play the Islanders, they play the Devils, they play them again later next month in November. That's their only road trip before Thanksgiving in November. They play the Islanders twice. They play them home and away this month. Those are going to be big games. Those are 4-point games. Now, they did start off good here against the Devils. That's a huge win for them. Now they have a couple games to maybe try and feel out where they are. You look at their schedule right now. They play Minnesota when they come back home. They play San Jose. They play Columbus and Florida. Those teams are struggling a little bit. Those are very winnable games for the Capitals and are going to be a barometer for what they look like going on this little East Coast trip up to New York. They need to see where they stand before they get to that West Coast road trip, because that West Coast road trip in the end of November seems like an easy task. But what are some of these teams going to look like at that point, right? Like San Jose, LA, Anaheim, Vegas. LA, Anaheim, and Vegas are actually playing fairly well, especially Vegas, right, which you end that road trip with. And then they play a couple games at home, and they go right back on the road. They play Chicago, Philly, Nashville, Carolina. Like, basically, from now, so this stretch, from now till American Thanksgiving, they play a ton of home games. And then after that, once they hit that West Coast road trip, from November 27th till New Year's, more than half of their schedule is on the road. They only have 4 home dates. 4 home games between that last game after American Thanksgiving to the New Year. 4 home games. So this is going to be a real stretch for them on the road, where they need to know kind of where they're at already. And hopefully that's the case, because some of these teams too, there's a couple, I see the Islanders, I see the Hurricanes, I see the Rangers. There's a couple big games here coming up to the end of the year for the Caps. And yes, they have a couple of injuries. Charlie Lindgren, they have injuries all over the map. They have goalie injuries, defensive injuries, forward injuries. But this is where you're going to see the depth of the Capitals really have to step up. Alexei Protas only played 5 minutes the other night against the Devils. That's something that you got to see him play a little bit more. Again, especially with a kind of an injury-prone Capitals team that's kind of, they're the second oldest team in the NHL. You need to see the younger guys step up a little bit. And Matthew Phillips only played 10 minutes the other night. So you want to see those guys producing a little bit, getting some ice time. They obviously don't have the respect of Spencer Carberry right now. And despite putting up a couple of points for Phillips, they need to gain more trust from the coaching staff, and it's going to alleviate some of the pressure on some of the high-end guys. And they have failed to do that so far. So as much as I'd love to say this is a turning point game, things are going to go well for the Capitals down the stretch here. Hunter Shepard didn't look great in this game. I'm happy that he got his first NHL start and his first NHL win with his parents in the stands. But I'm not quite there on the Capitals. That lack of goal scoring is very concerning to me. And I think that 6 goals that we saw the other night against the Devils is an outlier and not necessarily an indication of what we're going to see through the remainder of this season. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. What do you think of the Capitals? Do you think this may be a turning point game for them moving forward? Let me know your guys' thoughts down below. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys again next time.